Happy New Year from Betamax Blocker. A big thanks to those of you who watched my videos in 2023 and hope to see you again in 2024. What better way to ring in the new year than with some fun and unique New Year's film titles? So I dug around in my collection, looked online, and picked out some titles to celebrate to help us ring in 2024. For starters, here is the Criterion release of 1921's The Phantom Carriage. Written and directed by Victor Seastrom, The Phantom Carriage says that the last person to die on New Year's Eve will have the job of collecting the souls of all those who have perished in the following year. That will be their job, to sort of be the Grim Reaper. A man realizes his best friend had that job last year, and he's next in line for it. So, interesting that we start with kind of a weird horror film. I gotta say, the cinematography and special effects hold up really well. Yes, it is kind of a dated morality story. You know, it sort of prefigures It's a Wonderful Life and movies like that in some ways. And it was definitely influenced by Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. But all told, The Phantom Carriage is very compelling. This was my New Year's pick last year. And it's certainly worth a watch. The Criterion print is beautiful as well. So they restored this film that had been released all over the world with different edits and different titles, made the definitive version. Highly recommended. Good way to start off our list. Speaking of silent films, here is Charlie Chaplin's The Gold Rush, perhaps one of his most famous films. This is a much older DVD release. The Criterion Collection has a release of this too. I sadly don't have that one. The Gold Rush, of course, tells the story of the Klondike Gold Rush. In this case, Charlie Chaplin going north to make his fortune, getting into lots of wacky situations. Probably the most famous scene involving his cabin teetering on a cliff and everyone inside wondering where they can stand to prevent this thing from going over the side. But the Gold Rush has, of course, as with many silent films, an extensive romantic subplot, and that involves a New Year's Eve party where he attempts to bring the girl he loves to his house for a little celebration. I'll show you the back there, actually. Most prints of the Gold Rush use Charlie Chaplin's 1942 reissue, where he took out the title cards and he narrates the film, but that's actually a re-edited version. This DVD was one of, if not the first release to use the original 1925 print, which is what I always watch. That I think most people probably prefer that to his reissue, but still, even if you watch the reissue, that's fine. Very interesting film, one of the most iconic of all of the silent film comedies, and perhaps Chaplin's greatest work, or one of his greatest works. Let's talk about a Best Picture winner. This was one I couldn't find on any of those lists of good films to watch for New Year's. Best Picture of 1933, Cavalcade, which follows the story of the Marriott family from New Year's Eve 1899 to New Year's 1932. And they experience many things, both directly and indirectly, notably the death of Queen Victoria, World War I, the Titanic, and so on. Cavalcade is not well liked today. It often ranks amongst the worst Best Picture winners, and it's kind of easy to see why. It's very stagey. Diana Wynyard is awful. It's probably her worst acting role. She does a very poor job. Clive Brook isn't a whole lot better. Granted, he plays the same role in every single movie he's in. You know, it certainly has aged in that regard. It's very much a melodrama. But I will say the montage scenes work really well, and there is a certain sense of realism to what was then fairly recent history, so it makes for an interesting time capsule. You know, how did the 1930s look at the 1900s? We get a lot of insight into things like the Boer War, which I found really interesting because that's not widely studied in the United States, based on the Noel Coward play as well. You know, it's an interesting film, and when we get closer to Oscar season, I talk about the 1930s Best Picture winners. I'll do a video on Cavalcade. But for what it is, I think you can have fun with it, and parts of it were way ahead of its time there. A little bit of profanity, a little tiny bit of, you know, sexual innuendo going on that you couldn't get away with just a few years after the film was made. For a long time, Cavalcade was only available on VHS. In 2012, it was released to DVD as part of the giant jumbo Fox Anniversary Collection, which I do have. And then a few years after that, it was released to DVD and Blu-ray for the first time. But even then, it doesn't seem to have been extensively reevaluated it all, and remains one of the least liked Best Picture winners. One from a while later that is much more liked and appreciated, 1960s Best Picture winner, Jack Lemmon, Shirley MacLaine, and a great supporting cast, The Apartment. So, Jack Lemmon there rents out his apartment to his married superiors so they can use it as a clandestine place for affairs. Meantime, he courts Shirley MacLaine, who is being eyed by the boss, played by Fred MacMurray in one of his few villain roles, playing a very unrepentant scumbag and doing it really well. The Apartment might have aged in some regards, and it's often marketed as a comedy, which is weird because it's really much more of a drama. It's a little surprising how much it's pushed as a romantic comedy. It does have funny parts though, but all told, I gotta say, Lemmon's performance is relevant even today. Shirley MacLaine is great. I like the review that said this film is the archetype for the manic pixie dream girl based on her performance, and I can certainly see that. You know, it's certainly an interesting film. It's not my favorite Billy Wilder directed movie, but it's certainly one that's worth watching. Very dramatic, and New Year's, of course, plays a very prevalent part in it, as that's kind of when everything culminates. So, definitely worth checking out, laugh-wise and otherwise-wise, as they would say in the movie. So, that's a good one. Another from 1960, still has my price sticker on it. Ocean's 11, The Rat Pack. A daring casino robbery on New Year's, where Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack and a few supporting actors like Henry Silva and Norman Fell, who really don't get a whole lot to do, will rob multiple Las Vegas casinos and get away with it. So, a great cast, supporting roles by Richard Conte, George Raft, Angie Dixon, Akim Temiroff. Great cast, but I like the review of this that said it's kind of a lazy movie, like it's just based on, hey, let's watch Frank and Dean and Sammy and Peter Lawford and everyone else just be themselves, and that's kind of what it is. It's not a really ambitious film, but, you know, it's fun, it's breezy, it looks beautiful. I have to say, all those shots of 1960 Las Vegas look great, and, you know, you can't go wrong with Frank and Dean and company either. Got some songs, of course. Red Skelton has a funny cameo. If you're looking for maybe not a compelling, exciting crime thriller, but just something you can kind of lay back and enjoy on a lazy day, Ocean's 11 works in that regard, and I'd say it was worth watching. Another different kind of New Year's film. The SS Poseidon is struck by a tidal wave and capsizes at the stroke of midnight on New Year's. Ernest Borgnine, Red Buttons, and a crew of other people desperately try to make it to what was once the bottom of the ship and is now the top, and get out alive. So the Poseidon Adventure has held up also really, really well. The effects are great, the acting's pretty darn good. Gene Hackman, of course, as the lead, but he has a big ensemble supporting him. Gave us the very famous song, "There's got to be a morning after," that kind of thing. So, worth seeing. It's been copied a million times, it's been remade, but the original holds up well. I gotta say, some of those shots of people, you know, taking these incredible falls from what was once the floor and is now the ceiling straight down onto various objects make me cringe a little bit even today, because it looks pretty painful. Some good you know, underwater shots and things like that, and I like the Poseidon Adventure. Another good film to watch for New Year's, and very exciting, compelling stuff. A cousin to all those movies like The Towering Inferno and those big disaster films are popular at the time, but certainly one of the better ones. And lastly for today, because I had to save a few like An Affair to Remember and After the Thin Man for next New Year's, when we talk about 2025. But I decided to end on a weird note. Here's the American Graffiti 2-pack. Most people know American Graffiti from 1973. You know, it was a big break for several people involved and has become a classic. Has a killer soundtrack album complete with 2 Beach Boys songs. But we forget about the sequel, More American Graffiti, which tells kind of a combined narrative of New Year's Eve for several different members of the cast. Not all of the original American Graffiti cast return, notably Richard Dreyfuss. Does not. He probably figured after an Oscar win for The Goodbye Girl he didn't have to do it. I don't know. But More American Graffiti never really impressed me. It's a very ambitious project and has some weird kind of cinematography choices with like split screen things and whatnot, and comes off as kind of pretentious in my eyes. And it's not really as interesting because the first American Graffiti, of course, is a time capsule, and if you're interested in kind of that early 60s Americana, you'll really enjoy it. But this one is more detached from that. I don't know, I think it's trying to be more adult, but I don't know that it really succeeds. I haven't watched it in a very long time, but maybe one of these days, perhaps next New Year, I'll watch this one too. So what are some of your favorite New Year's films or some of your plans for this New Year? Again, thank you to those of you who watch my videos and comment. I appreciate it very much. I look forward to making many more things in 2024. We'll be back next week with the Beach Boys video. Till then, my friends, have a safe and happy New Year. We'll see you in 2024.